Hey, what is up, guys, and welcome back to WWPT 90.3 FM. I'm Max Dorsey, joined alongside my co-host Max Showstack, and this is Draft Talk with Max and Max. And today we are very, very fortunate to have a very special guest, one of the most respected names in the entire draft community, Matt Miller. Thank you for coming on today, Matt.
Yeah, you bet, guys. Appreciate you having me and making time for me.
All right, so obviously some recent news just came out, some big news affecting the draft, and that is the NFL Combine being canceled, no in-person workouts, only online Zoom interview kind of stuff. So our first question to you is, how does the Combine being canceled affect those opt-outs that have not solidified themselves as top picks? Like Micah Parsons obviously has solidified himself, JaMarr Chase has solidified himself, but guys like maybe Jay Tufele, Gregory Rousseau even, how is that going to affect their stock?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, had these guys known that the pandemic was going to last as long as it has and that things like the Combine were going to be so affected, they might have changed their decision to opt out when they did. I think what will become key for these guys right now, it's too early to say, right? That, their stock's affected, they're going to fall to the second round because of this, because it's just too soon, right? There's 3 months until the draft, so a lot can still change. But what becomes so key for them now is they're going to be able to have a pro day. So that pro day becomes your one shot. And something I tell players when I advise them about the draft process is you want as many opportunities as you can just in case you fail. So you really want the Senior Bowl, Combine, Pro Day, and then private workouts with teams, because say something goes wrong, say you get the flu at the Combine and you're not able to do your workouts, you want an opportunity to bounce back from that with something like a Pro Day, with something like a private workout. So that's why that becomes so huge for these opt-out players who were juniors, is that now they're not going to get a Senior Bowl. So like you said, like Micah Parsons, JaMarr Chase, they're not going anywhere. Trey Lance, you're not going anywhere. You are who you are. But for guys like you said, Jay Tufele at USC, like that's a big one. Jalen Twyman at Pitt, another big one, where guys who really could have used that extra year. So I think now the key for them becomes they have one opportunity to make up a lot of ground, and they have to make sure they ace that. So it puts a lot of pressure on not just their testing, like the 40 and things like that, but their interviews, how will they look in front of these teams. You can't be that guy who comes in out of shape. We've seen that before from juniors who opt out and then they show up and run poorly, or they look out of shape. Like you cannot do that right now. You got to make sure you're ready to go.
That's a very good explanation. I also never thought about that, especially with a guy like Rousseau, who seemed so solidified as a top 5 pick going into the season, and then the opt-out kind of changed everything. My first question is, so quarterbacks, kind of the position everybody wants to talk about. We know who the top 4 or 5 guys are, but what are some of the landing spots that you see these guys going to outside of the obvious, like Jacksonville? But outside of that, it's kind of all up in the air. There's like 5 or 6. So what are some of the landing spots that you think are ideal for these guys?
Yeah, I did like a huge thread on Twitter Wednesday about this, because there are so many teams that need a quarterback and there's just not very many available, which is like that every year. This year, it seems to be more intense, though. You mentioned Jacksonville. We can almost just take Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence out of the conversation for the next 3 months because they're together, right? They're good. After that, I think the New York Jets at 2. They have a hard decision to make with Sam Darnold. And I think the conversation there is, how much can you get for trading Sam Darnold? And then how much can you get for trading the number 2 pick? And they're kind of look at it that way and see where they go. But I do think that Zach Wilson is a really good fit there for them, just in terms of scheme. Now that Matt LaFleur has been hired as their offensive coordinator, like we know what that's going to look like, right? We know what that offense is. And Zach Wilson is a great fit for that, with the rollouts, the arm strength, the ability to throw down the field. So I think that's a naturally really good fit. Atlanta at number 4 overall. Matt Ryan's 35 years old and he's not playing poorly. Like, you wouldn't want to move on from him because of his play, but you have to start thinking about the future. I really like Justin Fields as a fit for the Atlanta Falcons. It remains to be seen what they're going to do. A new front office, new head coach coming in, what they're going to do with Matt Ryan. But I think that's a good spot for Justin Fields, who would benefit from not having to play right away. After that, I have actually Trey Lance as my number 3 quarterback, but I think there's a pretty good chance he's the 4th one drafted. I think the Carolina Panthers, with Joe Brady as their offensive coordinator, make great sense for Trey Lance. They're going to want an athletic quarterback who can move around, but also someone who can execute throws to every different level of the field. We saw it at LSU. We started to see, a little bit of it last year with Carolina. They're going to really want to open things up, spread the ball around. I think Trey Lance fits that really well. So that's 4 quarterbacks in the top 8 picks, guys, which is tough, and that leaves guys like Mac Jones potentially going to the top 15. It leaves Kyle Trask at Florida potentially being a top 20 or 22 pick in this draft. So there's going to be a lot of connection spots for these quarterbacks. And what's crazy is we can see 6 go in the first round, and then we might not see any go until, the 4th or 5th round, because there's just not that middle group of quarterbacks this year.
Yeah, building off of a guy you just said, Mac Jones, and what we were kind of talking about earlier with the lack of combine and the importance of pro days. You mentioned the Senior Bowl, which you're going to be going down to next week in Mobile, Alabama. Is this the most stacked Senior Bowl ever? I think Najee just announced he was going. Devonta said he was going yesterday. Mac's going to be there. A bunch of huge names. So have you ever been this excited about going to watch a Senior Bowl?
Guys, I'm so old. This is my 13th Senior Bowl, I think. So don't tell me how old you are. I don't want to know, unless I compare my Senior Bowls to your ages. So I'm very excited, though. I think there have been years where the quarterback talent made it a little more exciting. The year that Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen were both there, I was pretty excited for that one. But this year, I think it's just the difference in we haven't seen these guys all year in person, which is crazy for me. I can't remember the last year where I hadn't been watching players in person. So that aspect of it makes it really exciting, because you just get a different evaluation from a player when you can see in person how big they are, how fast they are, how hard they throw. All those things are so key to the evaluation. So not only is the roster really, really good, like you said, Devonta Smith isn't playing, but he's going to be there. And there's several first rounders who are going to be there. Mac Jones, Kyle Trask have a potential to really improve their stock this week. So it is one of the deepest Senior Bowl rosters I've ever seen. In terms of top end talent, there's probably not Devonta would be the exception as a top 5 pick, but there's not that year where it's, I remember seeing Aaron Donald down there, Baker Mayfield, like I said, Carson Wentz, Josh Allen. You knew those guys were going to go really, really early. Lane Johnson and Eric Fisher back in the day. So this year doesn't have that. The peak isn't as big, but the depth is just really impressive.
It's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out, especially with Jones and Trask trying to make a name for themselves. One guy you mentioned who obviously had that injury in the final, Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith or JaMarr Chase? That's kind of a question I just have to get out of the way, because I've seen it back and forth all the time. I just want to hear what you think on it.
It's going to be a fight for 3 months over those guys. I love them both. Can I hedge and just say I really like both? Right now, I give the edge to Devonta Smith, mostly because I feel like he is going to be a quicker transition to the NFL. And I think it's sometimes fun just to as an analyst, just to celebrate how dominant a player was. And really for Devonta, it was dominant over 2 years. A lot of people want to pull this thing back. Oh, he was wide receiver 4 in 2019. But he wasn't. I've talked to people, the coaches there. I've talked to the quarterbacks there, and they talk about Devonta had the best hands of anyone in that group. And while he was probably the 4th fastest of that 2019 Alabama group. He was so agile and such a great route runner with the best hands that you love that about his game. Now, I also really like JaMarr Chase. His body type is more what you want in the NFL at 6'1", 208. He's quite a bit faster than Devonta Smith, but one thing we haven't seen is JaMarr Chase play without Joe Burrow. We saw Devonta have success with Tua and with Mac Jones. And that's something that I really like about his game is, and I'm not saying that JaMarr Chase's success is all predicated on who his quarterback was, but it is a little bit harder to pull him out of that system and evaluate him because we've never seen him outside of it, right? He had one great year. He had 20 touchdowns. He won the Biletnikoff. He was amazing. Let's not take anything away from that. But we haven't seen him do it without Joe Burrow, who had arguably the greatest year of any college quarterback ever. So with JaMarr Chase, I actually have a couple more questions about him than I thought I would. Had he played this year, he could have answered some of that. I understand why he didn't. I totally respect that decision, but he's not this Julio Jones type wide receiver prospect that I think some people really want him to be right now.
Yeah, it's another classic situation of how that opt out is leaving so many question marks with one of the biggest big time players in college football of last year. And moving on to another positional battle, one that I actually didn't expect to see coming. And I was on the Draft Network the other day looking at getting my daily dose of mock drafts, and Solak said he had Slater actually picked at 4 ahead of Sewell, and he threw your name out there. He threw DJ's name out there, saying that Slater has actually taken over Sewell in that offensive tackle ranking. Is there any truth behind that? Could we actually see Slater pass Sewell?
Yeah, that was something I reported a while back, was that I was hearing from teams that some like Slater better than Sewell. So that's not crazy. And that happens, right? I mean, and I will say this, it's not like one scout on one team said Slater's better, right? That would be irresponsible to report that and say teams like Rashawn Slater more than Sewell, but it is pretty split out there. And it's not a recency bias because they both opted out. So it's not like we saw one and not the other, like a Smith versus Chase situation. I think with Slater, it's just people really value watching an offensive tackle and seeing them do things that are going to immediately translate to the NFL. That's why Big Ten schools and Notre Dame are putting more offensive linemen into the first round than anyone else. It's because what you watch them do on Saturday immediately translates. With Sewell, while he's a great athlete, his lateral mobility is fantastic, it is still a little bit of a projection because the way the Oregon offense was run. So I think that's where, if there is doubt, it's because of that. Now, I think they're really, really closely ranked as a prospect. I still have Sewell just slightly ahead of Slater. The draft process can change those things. We haven't seen either guy in so long that, like we were talking about earlier, how they show up to their pro day or regional combines, if they're able to go to those, that is going to matter. So they still have to prove themselves a little bit.
That's always cool to see those after the season ends, all of a sudden that buzz starts to come out, and whether it's a smoke screen or just actually the real case. I have a quick question on that though. How much does Chase Young's success and Rashawn Slater's tape against Chase Young help out his draft stock?
I was actually watching that tape again right before I jumped on with you guys. It helps, right? Because the thing that I like to do when evaluating a player is you try to find their marquee matchups. Like, you want to see best versus best. And the fact that Slater, I mean, he handled them, let's just be honest. I mean, in a way that no one else really did. We saw teams devote 3 blockers to Chase Young at times, and for Rashawn Slater to just go out there and be like, yeah, I got it. And he did it with so much agility and poise and awareness, and his technique is really good. That does help. Now with Penei Sewell, you could flip that around and say, watch his tape against Derek Brown, and you're going to see play power that you really don't expect from an Oregon left tackle. So they both have those games where you watch them against the best player they went against, and it's really, really good. I do think Slater has a lot more of those in his resume coming out of the Big Ten, where you can say, even against, going against a Michigan or a Wisconsin, like you're going against, Penn State, you're going against really, really good pass rushers in those games. So I think that's where Slater's 2019 tape is just so impressive. And I'm not even all the way through his 2019 tape yet. It takes a while to get through all the players, but every time I watch him, I tend to just like his game more and more each time.
And you mentioned the success against the Big Ten and the big schools helping him out. So are there any prospects, maybe a smaller school prospect that's got a late round grade that you see producing at the next level, or even a late day one guy that you think is a lot better than he's getting the credit for? Who's a prospect that you don't think has enough buzz around his name right now?
Yeah, I might just be like stuck on offensive tackles because that's what we were talking about. But I've been raving to the guys in the office with me about James Hudson from Cincinnati. He's just so athletic. And I'm really excited that he has graduated and will get to be at the Senior Bowl. I think he has a legitimate shot to be the 3rd or 4th tackle drafted, but no one's talking about him. We talk about, and they're deserving of it. Sam Cosmi, Dylan Radins, Liam Eichenberger, players like that, or Eichenberger, excuse me. We talk about those guys. I think James Hudson's being forgotten in that group. So I have a mock draft ready to rock and roll as soon as I'm free from my BR contract and can publish it. And James Hudson's in the first round. I'll tell you guys that. I'm a really big fan of his.
Yeah, make sure to peep that mock draft drop in, I think February 11th, right?
Right, February 11th. I think, Max, I think you're a member of the new site, so you'll probably get it a little bit earlier than everybody else. So I can't officially say that, but I feel good that you're going to get it early. So
right.
You can hook other Max up with those picks early.
Definitely. And another shout out to Matt. Make sure you subscribe to that too if you want everything Matt Miller content, early mock drafts, Zoom meetings with him. A really cool experience that I just signed up for and I've been enjoying immensely. All right. So my final question for you, Matt, is and I think some of the guys were talking about it on the Zoom the other day. Justin Fields, does the fact that he's an Ohio State quarterback, which I feel like is being thrown out so often, you really haven't seen the successful Ohio State NFL quarterback translate because that offense is so simplified. It's mostly one, you look at your first read, you hit your first read, and then it's a touchdown because they are such a dominant team. Does that concern you about Justin Fields, or is he different than the rest?
So I want to phrase it this way. Because he plays in that scheme, it is a question that you have to answer. So to me, it's not automatically a concern or a negative, right? But I know what this scheme is. It does simplify things. There's a lot of, like you said, it's one read and go. You have to answer that question. And I think the more you dive in with Justin Fields, you have to have that context in your mind. My biggest concerns with him are how long he holds the ball. Like, that's the biggest thing for me. It's not always an Ohio State quarterback. It's that he has to get the ball out so much faster than he is right now. And then even yesterday, I was rewatching the Clemson tape, and I was trying to count how many contested throws he made. There aren't many, guys. And that's the other thing that you really want to see when I break down quarterbacks. I'm looking for contested throws, because the NFL, it's almost all contested. You don't see a lot of that. So Justin has a great arm. He's a good athlete. He's a really good leader. I know he's a smart kid. You just can't watch his tape and see a lot of things you want to see in the NFL. Now, the good news for him is that Justin Herbert was the exact same way. You watch him play and you're like, gosh, this doesn't translate. The tools are good, but it doesn't really translate. And Herbert was fantastic this year. So I think there's a lot of people want to say, oh, Dwayne Haskins, because he's Ohio State. I think the traits are probably a little closer to somebody like Herbert, where in the right situation, he could really be explosive as a rookie.
I like to see how that goes back and forth, because with all those Ohio State quarterbacks, you have a guy who's maybe not fit for the NFL like Haskins and Cardale Jones, and then a handful of athletes like Braxton Miller before him. So right. Field kind of stands out, but he also still has that scheme. My last question is one thing that I kind of can't really grasp my head around on, and we mentioned the landing spots earlier. The Detroit Lions is kind of interesting to me, because also new GM and everything. So how do you anticipate they address the quarterback position, either keeping Stafford or deciding to go in a different direction with a quarterback at 7 if the right guy's available?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at that and say, well, Stafford's only 33. Why are we talking about moving on from him? But it's mostly because, there's an out in his contract right now, basically. And it is still, I think it's, I don't have it in front of me. I think it's like $19 million in a cap hit. So I think that's why there's that question. And because they have a top 10 pick, you see, okay, well, they could go, if someone's there, it makes sense to go a different direction. My guess would be they keep Matthew Stafford for right now. I think Dan Campbell was hired to work with Matthew Stafford. I think even, Brad Holmes coming from Los Angeles, not St. Louis, he was just somewhere where they gave up a ton of picks for players and they really mortgaged their future there. And I think he also knows how hard it is to find a good quarterback. So my bet right now would be that they keep Stafford. That could all change within the next month as they evaluate the draft class and say, it's a lot like the Jets. You have to look at the draft class versus what you have and the salary of a Stafford versus being able to move him to a San Francisco or somewhere like that, or Indianapolis, and what you could recoup. But I feel like Detroit probably sticks with Stafford for at least another year.
As a Denver fan, I'm hoping you're wrong. I hope Stafford comes over to Denver and Peyton makes a move for him. But regardless, Matt, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a blast for both of us. Obviously, once again, one of the most respected names in the draft community. So it's always fun when we are fortunate enough to have a chance to talk to guys like you and pick your brain about the upcoming draft. Hopefully we can get you on the show one more time, a little closer to draft time. But thanks so much, Matt.
Yeah, you bet, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Take it easy, everyone. Peace.
Yep. See you guys.
Word.
That was fun.
Yeah. He's a chiller.
He is. Oh, love that stick to